When my grandfather, John Whitmore, died, the whole county went silent. He wasn't just a rancher. He was the man who built half of the valley with his bare hands, his stubborn will, and more cattle than most men could count in a lifetime. I was 48 then, living a quiet life in Dallas, fixing farm machinery for a living, far away from the weight of the Whitmore name. The call came on a Sunday morning. "You'd better come down to the ranch," said Hank, our old foreman. "The lawyer's reading the will tomorrow." His voice carried that dry tone Texans use when the air's too heavy for small talk. Driving down those familiar roads, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I hadn't set foot on that land in 20 years. Not since the fight with my father, who swore I'd never understand what it meant to be a Whitmore. But as the old gate came into view, the sign still read, Whitmore Cattle Co., sun-bleached but proud. The funeral was small, simple, just the way Grandpa wanted. No speeches, no music, just the wind and the sound of horses pawing the dirt. My cousins stood in a tight circle, pretending to grieve but already watching each other's faces like vultures. After the service, the lawyer, a tall man with gray hair and a sharper look than a branding iron, opened the folder and said, "Mr. Whitmore left everything to his grandson, Jacob." The silence that followed could have split stone. My aunt gasped. My father's expression froze. And I just stood there, staring at the land stretching beyond the horizon, realizing I had just inherited $480 million and a storm that was about to break loose. The next morning, I stood in the lawyer's office, staring at the mountain of documents stacked before me. $480 million, he repeated, tapping the papers with his pen. Land, cattle, and holdings in 3 states. It's all yours now, Mr. Whitmore. Those words didn't sound real. My grandfather had been larger than life, but I never imagined the scale of what he'd built. Thousands of acres, breeding stock worth more than oil wells, contracts with international buyers. It was an empire, all under my name. When I drove back to the ranch that afternoon, the silence was heavier than before. The house sat on the hill like a monument to everything we'd lost and gained through generations. I walked into Grandpa's office, the one no one had dared to touch since his passing. The faint scent of tobacco and old leather still lingered. On the desk lay his worn Stetson hat, a cracked photograph of him and me when I was 10, and a single note in his handwriting. If you're reading this, you're ready to understand what it costs to keep this land. Outside, the sky stretched wide and endless. The cattle moved in the distance like dark waves on golden fields. It was beautiful and terrifying. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house reminded me that I was the last Whitmore standing between a fortune and the people who believed they deserved it more. At dawn, I found tire tracks near the barn. Someone had been there during the night. One of the padlocks on the feed shed was broken. That's when I knew. This inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a challenge, and maybe even a warning. I woke up before sunrise, the ranch still wrapped in fog and silence. The broken lock on the shed haunted my thoughts. Whoever came in the night knew exactly where to go. They hadn't forced the wrong door or wandered. They wanted to send a message. I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked out to the barn. Hank was already there, feeding the horses. His weathered face looked even older in the pale morning light. "You see those tracks?" I asked. He nodded without turning. "Yeah," he said. "2 sets of boots. One small, probably your cousin Ryan. He used to sneak out here when your granddad cut him off. The other, can't say. Ryan, the same cousin who once told me I didn't belong on this land. He'd wanted the ranch his whole life, and now that it was mine, he wouldn't let it go without a fight." By mid-morning, the rest of the family arrived. They didn't come to pay respects. They came with lawyers. My father led them, wearing a suit too fine for the dirt road that led up to the house. "Jacob," he said, his voice calm but cold, "we need to talk about this will. There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I replied. "Grandpa made his choice." He smirked. "Your grandfather wasn't in his right mind. We'll contest it." I looked at the faces gathered around, people I'd grown up with, eaten with, celebrated holidays with. Every smile they'd ever given me now looked rehearsed. When they left, Hank muttered, "Told you, boy. Money don't divide families. It just shows where the cracks were all along." I watched their cars disappear in a cloud of dust and realized Hank was right. The fight hadn't started today. It had just been waiting for me to come home. The days that followed were a blur of tension and whispers. Lawyers began calling, letters started arriving, all claiming irregularities in the will. But what hurt most wasn't the paperwork. It was the betrayal coming from people who carried the same last name as me. I spent most mornings riding the fence line, checking the herds. The land had a way of calming me. The endless hills, the cry of hawks circling high above. This was what my grandfather loved, what he lived for. And I could almost hear his voice in the wind. "Don't let them take it from you, Jake. This land knows who it belongs to." One afternoon, I found Ryan waiting near the corral. He leaned against the post, his expensive boots caked in dust. "You really think you can run this place?" he sneered. "I can try," I said evenly. He stepped closer. "Grandpa promised me a share. You? You ran off to the city and left him to die here. You think you earned it?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. The way his hands shook when he spoke, how anger had hollowed him out. "Watch your back, cousin," he said before walking away. That night, the storm rolled in from the west. The rain came hard, pounding the tin roof like gunfire. I stood on the porch watching lightning split the sky and saw headlights near the barn. I grabbed my rifle and ran out into the mud. But by the time I reached the stables, the lights were gone. Only the wind remained, carrying the faint smell of gasoline. I looked down. A slick trail led toward the hay bales. Someone had tried to start a fire, and suddenly, this inheritance felt less like a legacy and more like a war. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch soaked and quiet. The scorched corner of the hay barn told the story clearly enough. Someone had poured gas, but the rain had saved me. I kicked at the wet ashes, my jaw tight. Whoever did this knew how to hurt a man without killing him outright. They wanted to scare me. Hank found me standing there, soaked and silent. "They tried, huh?" he said, his voice calm, as if this wasn't the first time he'd seen hate burn hotter than lightning. "You should call the sheriff." I shook my head. "No police. This is family business." He looked at me, chewing his toothpick thoughtfully. "Family business turned ugly is still a crime, Jake." I didn't answer. Deep down, I knew he was right. But calling the sheriff meant dragging the family name through more dirt. Grandpa had always said, "Whitmore men solve their own problems." I intended to honor that. Later that day, I drove to the small law office in town. The lawyer, Mr. Carter, was waiting behind his desk, eyes sharp as ever. "They filed a petition this morning," he said, sliding the papers toward me. "Your father and cousins are claiming you manipulated the will." I laughed bitterly. "Manipulated? I didn't even know I was in it." "Doesn't matter," he said. "They'll use everything, your absence, your debts, your divorce, to paint you unfit." I stared at him for a long moment. "So, what do I do?" Carter leaned back in his chair. "You fight like hell, son. But remember, the courtroom's not the only place people lose everything." Driving home that evening, I saw Ryan's truck parked by the fence line again. He didn't wave. Neither did I. The war for the Whitmore Empire had officially begun. The following week was a test of endurance. Every sunrise brought a new letter, a new accusation, a new reminder that blood meant nothing when money was involved. I spent my mornings on horseback, riding through the open fields just to clear my head. Out there, under the vast Texas sky, it was easier to remember who I was, Not the man they painted in court papers, but the grandson of John Whitmore, the boy who learned to ride before he could read. Hank stayed close, quiet, but watchful. "They're getting desperate," he said one afternoon, tossing a stack of mail onto the porch table. "Rumor in town is they're trying to get the ranch appraised, probably planning to force a sale." I felt anger rise in my chest. Over my dead body. That night, I pulled the old ledger from Grandpa's safe. Every cattle sale, every loan, every handshake deal he ever made was written in his hand, meticulous, proud. On the last page, there was a letter addressed to me. "Jacob, if you're reading this, I'm gone. The Whitmore name isn't worth the money. It's worth the work. You'll see soon enough that the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. Protect it, even when the ones you love stand against you. J.W." I read those words 3 times before closing the book. They didn't make the pain easier, but they gave it meaning. At dawn, I found Ryan standing by the stables again, smoking. "You can't hold it forever," he said without looking at me. "Maybe not," I replied, "but I'll make damn sure you never take it." He smiled coldly. "We'll see." And as the sun rose behind him, I realized the fight for the ranch had become something deeper. A battle for my grandfather's soul. The court date was set for the following Monday, but the battlefield had already shifted from the ranch to the county courthouse, and to every gossiping diner and bar between Dallas and Waco. My family's lawyers were feeding stories to anyone who'd listen, that I was unstable, broke, drinking too much, and using the inheritance to hide debts. Lies travel fast in small towns. When I walked into the diner that morning, the room went quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Only Hank kept eating his eggs, calm as ever. "Let 'em talk," he said. "They can't change what's true." But truth didn't seem to matter anymore. That night I found one of our ranch hands packing his things. "Sorry, boss," he said. "Your cousin offered double. Folks say the place is changing hands soon." I nodded, though it felt like someone had just carved a piece out of me. By sunrise, 4 more workers had left. The Whitmore empire wasn't being taken by guns or court orders. It was being hollowed out, one man at a time. I drove into town to meet Carter again. He looked tired, as if the case was already weighing on him. "Jacob," he said carefully, "they've produced a witness claiming your grandfather planned to change the will before he died." I frowned. "Who?" He hesitated. "Your father." The words hit harder than any punch. My own father, the man who taught me how to saddle my first horse, was willing to lie to strip me of everything. I left the office without a word. Back on the ranch, the wind howled across the fields, carrying dust and memories. Standing there, I finally understood what Grandpa meant. The land doesn't choose sides. It just waits to see who's strong enough to stay. The day of the hearing came faster than I expected. I dressed in the only suit I owned, the same one I wore to my grandfather's funeral, and drove to the courthouse in silence. The building loomed against the bright Texas sky, its white columns gleaming like judgment itself. I could already see my family gathered on the steps, their lawyers beside them like vultures in tailored suits. Inside, the air smelled of paper, polish, and old arguments. When the judge entered, the room hushed. My father sat across from me, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, I almost remembered him as he once was. The man who taught me to rope calves, who'd put a hand on my shoulder after my first fall. But that memory dissolved when he looked up, and all I saw was cold calculation. Their lawyer spoke first, weaving lies with practiced grace. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "was estranged from his family and financially unstable. It is our belief he manipulated an elderly man's final will for personal gain." I felt my jaw tighten. When it was my turn, my lawyer, Carter, stood and said simply, "Your Honor, the deceased's handwriting, The notarization and every witness confirm the will's legitimacy. This is not about legality, it's about greed. For a moment, silence filled the courtroom. The judge's gaze lingered on me longer than I liked, as if searching for weakness. When the session ended, my father brushed past me. "You think this is over?" he murmured. "No," I said. "I think it's just beginning." Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills. I looked up at the sky, heavy, gray, waiting. I'd inherited more than land and cattle. I'd inherited a fight that would test every inch of who I was. The storm that rolled over the valley that night seemed almost biblical. Lightning flashed over the fields, throwing brief, violent light across the fences and barns. I stood on the porch with a glass of bourbon, listening to the rain pound against the wood. Every drop felt like a countdown. To what? I didn't know. By the next morning, the fight had spread beyond the courtroom. Bank representatives showed up at the ranch unannounced, asking for audits and access to financial records. Routine procedure, they called it, but I could see Ryan's fingerprints all over it. Someone was trying to freeze the accounts, to choke me out without firing a shot. Hank slammed the door after they left. "They're bleeding, you slow," he growled. "Starve the ranch, break the man." I nodded. "Then we fight the way Grandpa would have fought, on our land." We gathered the remaining hands, a small crew of loyal men who still believed in the Whitmore brand. For the next few days, we worked from dawn till dark, repairing fences, feeding the cattle, keeping the business alive by sheer will. I even drove a truckload of feed myself to the northern fields, just to remind them I wasn't going anywhere. But on the third night, as I was closing up the barn, I saw headlights again, a black SUV parked near the gate. No one got out, but I knew who sent it. A warning, a reminder that this war wasn't over. As the engine idled in the distance, I whispered to myself, "You can buy lawyers, you can buy banks, but you can't buy the land's memory." The SUV turned off its lights and drove away, but I knew they'd be back, and next time they wouldn't come to talk. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of dogs barking. Not the usual kind of bark. This was panicked, sharp, desperate. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, running out barefoot into the cold dirt. The air smelled of smoke. When I reached the barn, my heart dropped. The north fence was burning. Someone had doused the posts with diesel and set them ablaze. I shouted for Hank, and together we fought the fire with buckets of water and sand until our arms gave out. The rain started just in time to finish what we couldn't. When the flames finally died, I saw the mark carved into the dirt near the gate. A snake, coiled and crossed through with a line. Ryan's childhood brand, the symbol he used on his first calf. He wasn't just threatening me now. He was declaring war. The next morning, Carter called. "They've accelerated the court motion. Your assets might be frozen by the end of the week. If you can't make payroll, the staff will leave. They're cornering you." I looked out over the blackened fence line. Smoke still rose from the earth like ghosts. "Then they'll have to burn me down with it," I said. Later that day, I drove into town and found Ryan drinking at the only bar that hadn't banned him. I walked straight up to him. "If you want this land," I said quietly, "you'll have to take it from my hands." He smirked. "Don't tempt me, cousin." I leaned closer, my voice low. "Grandpa raised us both, but only one of us learned what his name means. You've already lost." I turned and walked out before I did something I couldn't take back. But deep down, I knew. So had he. I slept fitfully after the confrontation with Ryan, the smell of smoke still lodged in my throat. Dawn found me on the porch, coffee cooling in my hands, thinking about payroll, lawyers, and the men who had left. The ranch felt thinner at the edges, like a coat worn too many winters. I rode out before breakfast, tacking an old saddle onto a horse that knew the trails better than I did. We moved through the property, checking gates, meeting spots, and water troughs. Hank rode beside me, steady as oak, carrying a determination that steadied me when my doubts rose like tides. "They'll test you till you break," he said quietly. "Don't give them that satisfaction." I nodded and kept scanning the horizon for pickup lights that might mean trouble. Around noon, the sheriff called. "There's a hearing update," he said. "Your assets are under temporary injunction until next Tuesday. Nobody can touch them, but you can't withdraw either." The relief was bitter. For the moment, the banks couldn't freeze the ranch completely, but the hands needed to be paid and supplies bought. The ledger in my head was starting to look like a battlefield map. That afternoon, I walked the cattle pens and watched the herd move like a living curtain. A calf separated from its mother, and a young hand ran to corral it back. That small act, simple, human, felt like a line I refused to cross. Whatever the lawyers and cousins plotted, the daily work had to continue. As twilight came, I sat on the tailgate of the truck and watched the sky bruise purple. I felt like an inheritor and a guardian. The Whitmore name was a promise I intended to keep, always true, no matter what burned around it. The injunction bought me days, not peace. By Monday sunrise, the courthouse steps were crowded again. Family, reporters, and ranchers who came to watch a Whitmore brawl like a rodeo. I walked in holding Grandpa's ledger and a small metal key I'd found beneath the false bottom of his desk drawer. I didn't know what it opened, only that he'd meant for me to find it. Carter met me outside the courtroom. "They filed a motion alleging fraud," he said. "If the judge believes them, she can appoint a receiver and strip you of control today." I breathed slow and nodded. Losing the ranch in a single afternoon felt possible. When the hearing began, their lawyer paraded experts who used polite words to call my grandfather senile. My father testified next. He spoke softly like a preacher, claiming Grandpa had planned to divide the estate equally. Something in me froze. Then Carter stood. He asked to introduce new evidence, a safe deposit box registered to J. Whitmore and accessed by the key I carried. The judge allowed a recess. We crossed the street to the bank. Inside the box lay 3 items: a notarized video on a flash drive, a certified appraisal, and a handwritten letter addressed to me, and to whoever thinks blood entitles them to what work has earned. Back in court, the video played. Grandpa sat in his office, clear-eyed and steady. He explained his decision, named betrayals he had forgiven but not forgotten, and said plainly that he left the ranch to me because I had no hunger for it, only respect. The appraisal proved every number. The letter confirmed every word. Silence filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, her voice calm and final. "Counsel," she said, "I've heard enough for today." The gavel struck once, sharp, echoing through the chamber like thunder over open plains. "The court upholds the will of the late John Whitmore," the judge declared. "Full ownership of Whitmore Cattle Company remains with Jacob Whitmore." For a moment, I couldn't move. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. Ryan's jaw tightened, my father's shoulders slumped, and somewhere behind them, I heard someone curse under their breath. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Outside, the sun hit my face, warm and blinding. Carter clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, Jake," he said, but I shook my head. No, he did. That afternoon, I drove back to the ranch alone. The cattle were grazing by the river, the same stretch of land my grandfather had fenced with his own hands half a century ago. The wind carried the smell of cedar and rain, and for the first time in months, it didn't taste like ash. I stopped by the old barn, now rebuilt, and ran my hand over the new wood. "You were right, old man," I said softly. "The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it." Hank came up behind me, wiping his hands on a rag. "So what now?" he asked. "Now?" I smiled faintly. "We rebuild. We run the herd. We keep the name clean." as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in amber and fire. I felt the weight of everything settle: grief, pride, peace. I turned toward the house, my home once again, and whispered to the wind, "Thank you, Grandpa." Then, to whoever was still listening, the viewers of this story, I said, "Thank you for hearing mine. Tell me where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe for the next ride."